Welcome to Audience Part 2. This is the video that gives you the answers to the assignment, an explanation of the answers, and brief directions for your next discussion. For your assignment, you were asked to come up with at least 8 audience factors, things about your audience you might know that could help you decide how to write for your audience. I told you that my class normally comes up with 11 of them, and here they are: age, gender, education, knowledge, and intelligence, family status, socioeconomic status, ethnicity and culture, religion, location and region, political affiliation, career, and hobbies and interests. I'm wondering how many you got right, so please compare and contrast what you did for your assignment and what I have here. Next, I'm going to go through each one of the factors and discuss the importance of them and how they can be used. Before I explain all the different audience factors and the importance of them, I want to tell you about 2 key components that you will see coming up over and over again as I talk about these audience factors. One of them is common experiences, and the other is what is important. The first of the 2 key components is common experiences. Common experiences are just what they sound like. They're experiences that people have in common. So when you're thinking about your specific audience and your audience factors, you're going to want to think about what sort of things do the people in my specific audience have in common? What have they gone through that is similar? Why do we need to know this? Well, you use these common experiences to create examples with which your audience can connect. When you are explaining something, it's oftentimes you will use examples to help explain what it is you're talking about. So these examples can be general or they can be more specific. If they are specific examples that you know your audience will understand and with which your audience can connect, then you have made a connection with your audience for one, which is ethos, which we'll talk about later when we talk about Aristotle. But you've also given them an example that they can truly understand. And that level of understanding is key when you're writing. The next key component is what is important. What is important? What does your audience value? That's what you need to know. That's when you're going through those specific audience factors. You want to find out what's important to your audience. This is going to help you persuade your audience. To our audience factors. The first one we have is age. The importance of knowing the age of your audience, well, there's several things that are important about it. First of all, it gives you a frame of reference as far as knowing what was popular for them during their most informative years. What generation do they belong to? Next, what historically has the audience lived through? What have they experienced? So let's say I wanted to talk about something that changed the way we viewed the world. For all of you out there who are listening to this, you have lived through 9/11. So I could talk about how that really changed the way we looked at the world and how we fit into the big global picture. I couldn't really talk to you about when the first time someone walked on the moon, because I'm guessing most of you probably weren't even born when that happened. So you want to think about what your audience has actually experienced. The last thing about age is it gives you an idea of how in-depth you can write as far as what is the intelligence or developmental level of your audience. Most of the time you're going to be writing to adults and this won't be much of a factor. But if you are writing to anybody younger than an adult, then you need to take that into consideration. Gender. The biggest part of gender is the common experiences for each gender, for each gender specifically, because there are things that men go through that women don't, and things that women go through that men don't. Additionally, there's pressures put on men or expectations put on men and women by society, which is our other common experiences that we often have. Number 3 is education, knowledge, and intelligence. The first thing I need to tell you is that they're not all the same thing. Education is how much education or schooling the audience has had. How far have they gotten in their education? Have they graduated high school, college, beyond college as a master's degree or a PhD? Now the next one is knowledge, how much the audience knows. This is how much information they have stored in their heads about specific subjects. You can think of knowledge as data or Jeopardy. The last one is intelligence. Intelligence is the ability to process the knowledge and apply it to situations and to their environment. So intelligence is actually using that knowledge. Why do we need to know education, knowledge, and intelligence? Because we have to know at what level to write for our audience. That's one of the things. The problem is we don't always know our audience's knowledge and intelligence. Unless we have them take an IQ test, it's really hard to know what their intelligence is. It is easier for us to know what our audience's educational level is. So that's what we have to go off of. So you have to sort of make some generalizations. You can assume that if someone has graduated high school, they have specific knowledge about U.S. history, basic math, basic biology, etc. And you also can assume they have a certain intelligence level to have been able to process all of that and graduate. Then, if you know that your audience has graduated college or in college, then you know they have more specific knowledge about more subjects and probably a slightly higher intelligence level because they've had to process all of that. The other reason why we need to know someone's education is because we need to know how much we need to explain. So we don't want to give too much information. If our audience already knows something about the subject, we don't want to repeat it for them and insult their intelligence. But we also don't want to leave out information if our audience doesn't know that information. So we really have to know how much our audience knows. And then, of course, at what level to write. How in-depth of an analysis can you go? And that's going to be based a lot on their intelligence. Number 4 is family status. By family status, I mean, is your audience single, married, divorced, widows? Do they have children? Do they not have children? Do they have grandchildren? And though you may think that this isn't all that important, your family status is something you deal with every day and really influences oftentimes your decisions. So it can really influence what is important to someone, their family status. Additionally, people go through common experiences. People who are single are dealing with dating. People who are married have to deal with living with someone else. People who are divorced have similar experiences going through divorce. People with children have similar experiences raising their children. So these give you common experiences and what is important. Number 5 is socioeconomic status. Your socioeconomic status is going to give you the two basics, common experiences, and what is important. The story I always like to tell with this one, the example I like to give, is that one time I was watching Good Morning America. Yes, I admit it, I've watched Good Morning America. And they were giving the big teasers about how to save money, ways to stretch your budget. So I thought, well, I can always use to save a few dollars. I'm going to watch it. When they got to that segment, the advice they gave in order to save money was the following. Let's see, one of them was to, when you go to the gym, to no longer use a personal trainer. Another one was to sell your vacation home. And a third one was to not buy all of your coffee every day at Starbucks, but instead bring some from home. Now, I don't have a personal trainer. I don't even belong to a gym. I certainly can't afford to buy all my coffee at Starbucks because I drink a lot of coffee. And I don't own a vacation home. So all of these things that they were giving as examples to cut your budget were not aimed at me. It was the wrong audience. They were aiming it at the wrong audience, or I should say I was not in the audience at which they were aiming this. It was the wrong socioeconomic status altogether. My theory is that they figure if you can stay home and watch Good Morning America, then you have enough money that you don't have to go to work. Number 6 is ethnicity and culture. This will give you common experiences and what is important, and also people's values. Oftentimes your ethnicity and or your culture, if you hold to the strict values of it, can give you an idea of what people value and what they don't. What's important, that also helps you then figure out what is important to them. 7 is religion. Religion is very similar to culture and ethnicity because religion in and of itself is pretty much a culture. So we have the same common experiences, what is important. Here you can add morals with the values. And also depending on someone's religion can tell you how they view specific issues. Number 8 is location and region. There's 2 parts to this. One is your specific location and the other is your type of location. So by your specific location, you can go from a very wide scope to a very narrow scope. For instance, we could say that the location is the United States, so it would include everyone in the United States. And everybody who lives here should have some specific knowledge about the country and some common experiences. Then you can also shrink it smaller and say, okay, everybody in the Midwest, or then smaller and say Illinois. Even smaller, you could say Central Illinois, or we could even say Peoria. And what you can assume is that people have specific knowledge about the area in which they live. They'll have some common experiences. For us, the crazy weather, incredibly hot and humid in the summer and crazy cold and snowy in the winter. So we have some of those common experiences. We have some shared knowledge. People from Illinois know that there's always that big rivalry between the Cubs and the Cardinals. And then it also could be what is important to us. So maybe certain economic issues or certain laws might be important to us because of where we live. The other thing is the type of location in which your audience lives. And there are 4 basic types. There would be urban, which would be in the city, suburban, in the burbs, small town, and rural. People who live in these types of locations also have specific knowledge about that type of location. But more importantly, they have common experiences living in those locations. For example, if you live in a small town, most people have this common experience that other people know your business before you know your business. That's how fast word spreads. Additionally, it'll tell you what can be important to these people. For example, people who live in an urban area often value public transportation. In places like Chicago and even especially in New York, it can be difficult or expensive to have a car, and so public transportation is very important. Now, for me, I live rural, so I actually have to drive into town to get public transportation. Therefore, public transportation is not important to me. However, I also have a well, so rain is very important to me because if it doesn't rain, I don't have water to wash my hands or flush my toilet or take a shower. Whereas people who live in a small town or in a suburban or urban area, they just turn on their faucet and never think twice about it. Number 9 is political affiliation. It's hard to understand political affiliation if you're just trying to think about where they fall in the continuum between liberal and conservative. What we really could know about our audience is to which party do they belong? Are they a Democrat, Republican? Are they part of the Green Party? Are they a Libertarian? Are they part of the Tea Party? Knowing which party, which would be their political affiliation, the audience has, will give us some ideas about what's important to them and how they view specific issues. Additionally, with that, you can also get an idea of, for some of them at least, where they fall in that continuum between liberal and conservative. People who are Democrat often fall more liberal. People who are Republican often fall more conservative. Now, some of the other parties are a little in between. But the thing you have to remember is that most people aren't on the extreme left or the extreme right. They're usually somewhere in the middle. So it's more important to know how they view specific issues. I always like to put career right next to hobbies and interests because they have the same basic answers. Just like most of the other ones, common experiences and what is important are part of career and hobbies and interests. But what's different about career and hobbies and interests are the first 2 bullets here. The first one, specific knowledge about their career, job, and or field of work. So people in a certain job, it doesn't matter what the job is. You could be a nurse, you could be a welder, you could be a teacher, you could be a pilot. It doesn't matter. You have specific knowledge about that job that people who have never had that job do not have. So if you are speaking to people who you know are in a specific job, it allows you to use really specific examples. It tells you how much you have to explain to them and how much you don't if your topic has to do with their job. And think about this. Oftentimes, when you're out of school, who you write for are your coworkers. Additionally, you can use jargon. Jargon are terms that are specific to a small group. And so jargon allows you to speak oftentimes more succinctly and gives you sort of a common bonding experience. Lastly, we have hobbies and interests. And as I said, it's very similar to careers and jobs because this is basically what you do with your time that you're not working. Not that we all have very much time that we're not working, but this is something that we spend our time on. And so people with specific hobbies and interests have knowledge about those hobbies and interests that people who do not participate in them will not have. So again, you can use specific jargon to that hobby and interest, or talk about common experiences, and then of course it's going to explain to you what is important. After you listed all the audience factors and explained what was important about them, I asked you to answer this question. How would you write for a diverse audience? Well, there's a couple of ways you would write for a diverse audience. First, you would write at a level appropriate for the median education level of your audience. So think about where sort of the middle is, and you want to aim at that middle educational level because you don't want to lose anybody, but you also don't want to talk over anyone's heads. Next, you would use general examples most audience members can understand. You want to make sure that every time you're making a point, the example that you give, everybody can understand it. Now, I know I said you should use specific examples in order to make a connection with your audience. You can do that too. So whenever you're making a point, first you'll use at least one general example that your entire audience can understand. Then you're going to use a specific example aimed at one of the groups in your audience. Now, will you use an example aimed at every group in your audience every time you make a point? No, because that would get way too long. So you just want to make sure that at some point throughout your paper or throughout your argument or your speech that you are giving a specific example for a small specific group so that you make a connection with each group at some point throughout. Now that I've given you all the answers, I want you to start comparing your notes. So I want you to look at your answers for the assignment, if you haven't already done that, and compare them to what is here on the video, the answers that I'm giving you. Then the next thing you're going to do is you're going to go to forums and complete the formal discussion assignment called Audience Comparing Notes.